Um, this research is on something called theatre in education. Yeah, and it is a program, or it was a program that was run by Alvin in Paris, who is not here because she's got Bugatti for show, and Julius. Yeah, so the theatre program itself was conducted by these three. Alvin was supposed to be here, but he's very ill, so he can't make it at all. So I will be presenting his part. Okay. Now, what happened was that the program was proposed to the Esplanade education team. Michelle, over here, produced the whole thing and organized everything between everybody and the Esplanade, got all the kids in, etc., etc. Um, it was funded by the Esplanade, and it was supposed to be a two-term Esplanade. Oh.
Destination studies. The trial.
Yeah. So this, yeah. Supposed to be action research, meaning that there was supposed to be two parts. Yeah. After this first cycle, Adit would have written the curriculum, which we'll talk about later at the end. And then we would have rerun, the three of them would have rerun the curriculum, the new curriculum with another group. But part two didn't happen. Yeah. So yeah, now the people who wrote the paper with me, so I kind of put in the research proposal and all that with the NEC, and you've seen all my research. The list is I've given you everything I have. Any can discuss. IB is actually my ex-boss from SUSS, who now hops on with me for all of the research. She's a very good analyst. So after I've explained all the analysis part to you, right? It's very long and long-winded, it has many points. After that, my brain was just blown out after reading it 10 times. She took the paper and rewrote my discussion for me brilliantly. Yeah, so the discussion part of the paper was rewritten by her. And Jude is the person I told you who does all the quantitative surveys and analyzes them. Okay, so we're looking at how this data and education creates pathetic social interaction and deliberate social decision making for the students. So we're looking at two things: empathy and deliberative social decision making. Okay, so a brief history of TIE, right? When I went to do the literature review, is that it started in Coventry 1962, so a long time ago. And the emphasis for TIE is this, that it's supposed to be class size engagement as opposed to a full auditorium, like what we have in foreign theatre. Yeah? So it's meant to be small class size. The actors, also teachers. So it actually recognizes the professionalism of the actors who also play the role of teacher. So this is very different from another program, like a program called Drama in Education. Drama in Education is when the teachers in school enact a role. This is the other way around. The actors professionally must perform the play and also step out of the play and become the facilitators. And normally there is an issue or concern that is about social justice and responsibility, which then the participants have to respond to. So because it is professionally run, it tends to have to be run in a professional theatre space, hence the Esplanade. Now, because of this, it's also very resource heavy. Because later, as I'll explain, the actor teachers, right, because it's class size and small group, you need at least 4 or 5 facilitators, which is what happened in this case. And Xingxuan is one of this event program. Okay, so locally, right, in 1992, the nursery stage, for the first time ever in this country, conducted TIE in Singapore. Yeah, with all of the objectives of the original TIE. They worked with all these students across the schools for 6 years. And then in 1998, it stopped. And it disappeared. Right, Julius? Disappeared?
As far as I know.
Yes, it completely disappeared. Oh, someone is here. Okay, so when I must ask NEC, right, for funding or support. So the first thing you do is always context, right? Ask them right about context. Okay, context of the community. Why TIE in Singapore now? Right, and this is the way I positioned it. Young people, when you were 14 and I was 14 and Yan Yan was 14, and whoever is 14 now, our experience of life is vastly different. Do you agree with me? Yeah. So I call this complex social terrain. You've got bullying, you've got cyber stuff going on, you've got physical, issues of sexuality, etc., religious radicalization, social media expectations, etc., etc., etc. Now, we have kind of lumped it together as personal mental health concerns. And this is the part where I'm critical of, right? Because actually, I don't think it's just personal. You bet also lah, right? And of course, we've got all these different examples, yeah, of telling us how young people need to be helped in these areas. So, a lot of attention given to personal mental health. But especially if we look at the 21st century skills, we've got things like responsible decision making, right? Social awareness. What about all these areas that require social responsibility and social maturity? How are we developing young people for that? Because while we are, telling them, we're going to support your mental health, give them all kinds of coping strategies, etc., it doesn't show how it's feeding into this. And this area actually is the area that is, if not done or carried out maturely, causes personal problems. So this was the way I positioned TIE, to say that unless we enable students or put them in scenarios where they get to engage in decision making, social awareness, relationship management, they are not going to have space to practice this at all. And if they don't, you're not going to achieve your 21st century skills and competencies. Yeah. This is the NAC Arts Education Framework. So there's life skills, arts, and society. So you have to apply for whatever NAC, right? It's educational. You must do this, okay? You must show them the link between, especially NAC, what it wants to do. You must be explicit about it. All right. So, like, how explicit? TIE can be stable and structured program for theatre educators to develop social competencies in young Singaporeans. It's very clear. I'm going after social competencies. TIE engagement approaches foster empathetic social interaction and deliberative group decision making. How does TIE develop social competencies? Second sentence tells you how. It is as clear as that. Okay, so I'm also telling you how to structure those proposals if you want to do programs like that. Okay, so two main research questions we're going to look at. And it has to do with program design and evaluation. It does not deal with student progress or student evaluation. Yeah. So this is really pedagogical curriculum design and development. How does TIE enable students to engage in social interaction and subsequently social decision making? That's the first one. How effective is TIE in fostering greater empathy through social interaction? Okay, this is when Alvin is supposed to come on and explain, but Julius, you can help, right?
I'll do what I can.
Okay, so the TIE story of injustice uses the legend of Bukit Merah. Everybody knows what legend this is? Yeah, the swordfish legend. And so it was put together in 2024 by three of them. Followed the format of TIE. They needed 4 to 5 facilitators, which includes CJ. And so then they started training sessions with the facilitators to understand how to be the actor and the teacher at the same time involved. Okay, so that's the complicated part. And that's the curriculum design that Adit then looked after. So these were the dates that we carried out the training session. Now, once the facilitators were trained, we then conducted the actual program on 23rd and 24th October. With a group of upper primary and lower secondary students. I'll show you the participant details later. Okay, so there were 3 parts to the program. Yeah. The first part was introduction and games. So the students were about 20 students, roughly each group. They were put in groups of 4, so 4 groups of 4 to 5 students, and then they started to play games like Monster Race and all that. And all this was, to get the students warmed up. To get them to speak up, to work together, have a bit of fun. But because this became competitive, right? Once you make something competitive, you start to have this fair, not fair thing. Sure, that group's not fair. There's more people there, something like that. Okay, so already there's some sense of grievance link that is created through these games. Okay, now the second part that is called the pre-activity. Although the pre-activity was actually rather long. Yeah. What happened here is that all the students then played a role. They became students of a school called Majula Secondary. In Majula Secondary, there is a new principal called Mr. Lee. So Mr. Lee, first of all, comes into class of the school and wants all the classes, which are small groups, small classes, to choose a class monitor. That's the first task. The second thing that then happens is Mr. Lee announces that the passing rate for English will no longer be 50%. It will be 75%. And he wants the class monitors, selected class monitors, to then get their friends to sign on the consent form to consent that the English passing rate will be 75%. So, as you can see from this situation, right, class monitor, students have to get together, decide who they want to be a leader, how they are going to select their leader, discuss the pros and cons, whether or not then they want to accept or reject the new 75% rule, discuss alternatives, figure out how to negotiate with Mr. Lee that this is a really bad idea, or maybe we should try something else, yeah, and express how they feel. So the scenario then objectively, we're trying to get students to do all of this. And then finally, the third activity. Can you believe it? All this took 3 hours. Yeah, actually a lot of people in 3 hours. Okay. The last activity. So big wayang, literal wayang, drums and all. The Raja comes in, right? The swordfish situation. So everybody now plays a role of the hunter, carpenter, fisherman, and hunter, carpenter, fisherman, paddy farmer. Always forget paddy farmer. And then what happens is that the chief minister, who is the kaki of the Raja, right, comes and says that the Raja wants to increase taxes because the swordfish are killing all the soldiers and they need to hire more soldiers and defend the village. So that's the first problem that comes up. Everybody, the hunters are asked to provide more meat, paddy farmers more rice, fishermen more fish, and the woodcutters more wood. And then the second thing that happens is then Nadim, the little boy, comes and suggests to the Raja to put the banana stumps at the coast, right? And so when the swordfish try to attack, their noses will get stuck in the banana stump. And so the Raja followed the idea, and it was very successful. But unfortunately, the Raja suspected that Nadim, actually it's the chief minister, we whisper into the Raja's ear, that Nadim will be a future troublemaker. He will want to be the Raja instead and overthrow the current Raja. People are pronounced. And, yeah. And so the Raja decides to arrest and execute Nadim. And so what happens here is that the students must face problems of the increased taxes and start to discuss what to do, right? Listen to each other across the groups, have some kind of collective identity, right? No, we're going to do this. Or yes, we're going to do this. We're going to work together in this way. Discuss and express how they feel then about Nadim's arrest because they see Nadim, being arrested. Collectively then try to prevent him from being executed. Reflect on whether they're collective action or inaction because they scared they also get executed. Collectively kind of reflect on it. And express how they feel about the outcome. So these are more reflective of their action in role.
Okay. Play the audio.
Sorry?
Play the audio.
Oh, yes. Okay, I'll give you an audio to let you hear what goes on in the hall. Not video.
Hold on, there's no audio being
Oh, you
played.
want to make it louder? Is it? I think here. Yeah. Okay, try.
Yep.
The time is on.
Share computer and for the all share to the on
Oh,
stereo.
so-
Stereo.
Thank you.
Because we don't have enough fish, right? So they are also suffering. Oh no, look at the carpenter. The whole village, we are all very worried about the swordfish. Are you scared?
Yes, I'm very scared.
Yeah, okay. Let's mend the net. Mend the net anywhere over there. You look scared. Don't worry, young one. Don't worry. He will help you also. Yeah. Let's look at the whole.
Yeah. This is data. This is my data. And we are trying to listen to the students talking from the data. You'll be doing it tomorrow. I should bring your headphones. Yeah. This is the kind of data that I got. I didn't video record because we are not allowed, but I took audio record for the purpose of event information. Okay, any questions about the program before I go to the research design?
Small question on the warm-up exercise. Was it deliberately unfair, deliberately competitive?
Julius?
Yes, I'll clarify something as well. Yeah, so everything is all planned for. I mean, what games we play, how competitive it can be, and whoever's the referee, he makes certain ambiguous decision. So like it's like games like arrange yourself according to the length of your nose or your fingers or your palms, and so everything's arbitrary and okay, these one wins. So every group has a facilitator. I think you play a devil's advocate if everybody's like really for it, or you can, I mean, yeah, so you play an opposite role for the joint responses. So I think that it's all kind of structured that way. Another thing to clarify is for part 3, right? So the first one is the word school, something that they can feel closer to, right? But the students, the principal, they can relate. And then when we go to part 3, which is the world of the play, and we will have a short break, and then we'll be going on some roles and costume to get into roles. And so they remain in the same group with the group facilitators. So now they take on a different role in the world of the play. So we taught so we had so they wear sounds, so there's something to do, and then they can get excited because it's something we will play. And then they'll be like fishermen, we taught how to fish. So that's a certain kind of a action they do, right? And so there is some things that they can go back to. So physically already they embodies action, and also they have costumes. And facilitators, same thing, they play a role. Either they play a leadership if everybody's quiet, or if somebody's outspoken, then it's quiet and see how to play out. The other thing is we are quite used to actor facilitators, not so much actor teachers, but they're more facilitators. I mean, wherever the difference can be. Yeah, for that clarifies. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Let's see if there's anything. Is it your turn next? Oh, okay. This is for you to know. This is how I had to put my recorders, the audio recorders, research design. Right, so I had to get Paris to give me the floor plan and then figure out where were the groups and where to place the recorders. So this was part 1, and then part 2, the groups will be seated here. The principal will talk to class monitor here. So I needed to go and find all these. Actually, my co-director found for me lah. We found a lot of Zoom recorders to record all the little chit chat that's going on in the groups. Yeah, and then there's a third one, which is this one. There's a stage area here, so I had to put the recorder here. The groups moved there. So a lot of planning needed to be put in place. Yeah, for me to be able to record and capture the data as best as I can. Okay. So participant profiles. What happened? Numbers of people. So 19 upper primary students came on the 23rd October together with 2 teachers. So the teachers also do post-program survey. The next day, 22 lower secondary school students came in. So they all agreed to fill in the post-program, post-session feedback. In terms of consent, we did not get, we didn't have to get parents to consent, right? Because they're all underage. So as I always told you all, to position this as a program evaluation, that when the teachers agreed to come for the program and it was free, right, Michelle? Yeah. That they already signed that they would agree for the program to be evaluated that the participation will be audio recorded, and they have a voluntary feedback form to fill out after. So once they sign that, we're all clear. Okay, the research method. So mixed method. Qualitative evaluation, which looked at the decision modes scale, right? So what were my data collection tools listed? Audio recordings of students, audio recordings of facilitators during both their training session and the actual session itself. The documentation of training sessions, so there were logs that were taken by Julius and Clarice that were sent to me with videos as well. So I looked through every single one of them. And then the lesson plans of the TIE program for both actually phase 1 and phase 2. Quantitatively, right, we looked at the effects of the TIE experience at the end, and we adapted the scale of the empathy components questionnaire, which Jude will tell you more about. And Jude is going to tell you it now.
Everyone, and thanks, Dr. Loh. Okay, so now I'll actually be walking well through how we develop our quantitative questionnaire as well as some of the results. And Dr. Loh mentioned me before this that actually many of them are currently working on adapting scales and events and things like that. So I'll also try to just share a bit more about that process of how to adapt, as well as some things to consider and these tips. Okay, so as mentioned earlier, when we started this investigation, we were very interested in empathy because the research shows that empathy is one of the core traits that helps you develop social development, especially among the youths. So with that in mind, we started by exploring, just checking, doing a good review of all the existing empathy skills that are out there, especially the validated ones, validated and reliable ones. And so we looked and we eventually decided to come to the empathy components questionnaire, or ECQ for short. And so we chose this because this questionnaire was very unique in the sense that it actually broke empathy down to 2 parts. There's the affective components, which is talking about your emotions, feelings, and there's that cognitive part of it, which focuses more on thinking and like perspective taking and all that stuff. And so since we were interested in social decision making, I felt that it's important to capture that cognitive part. That's why we ultimately decided to choose the ECQ. So the ECQ as a whole, the original one, actually consists of 20 items across 5 sub-dimensions. Okay, so the sub-dimensions are affective ability, which is the capacity to recognize and share others' emotions. So basically, really the ability to effectively empathize. Affective drive, which is the intent and motivation to engage with others' emotions. So it's like I'm going to even consider empathizing with you, the drive. Affective reactivity, which is actually responding appropriately to other people's interests. So there's the affective side, and then there's the cognitive ability, which is basically the same thing but for cognition. So the capacity to take another person's perspective, and then it's cognitive drive, which is the motivation or even intent to, I'm going to try to consider your perspective in this case. So for this study, as we were working with youths, it was important to make sure that the survey was straightforward, easy to understand, and most importantly, short. The attention span is, you try giving them a 20 item survey, like halfway through they'll start to start entry 5 or something. So just keep that in mind. Know your audience, know who will be doing it. If they're older, they would typically be able to go through a bit more. So we only selected the items from these sub-dimensions that we felt were most relevant to the program. And so by relevant, what I really mean is that the students would have had the opportunity to actually practice or exercise those aspects during the span of the program. Okay, so in other words, when adapting these kinds of skills, it's really important to be clear on what your program's activities are and what their specific goals are, and why are you even doing those activities. And then select the items that measure those goals. So for example, one of the original items in the scale is, I'm not very good at noticing if someone is having emotions. Yes, this is an important skill of empathy, but it's not one that the students get to exercise during the program. right? So rather an item like I take an interest in looking at both sides of every argument. That one we know there's the activity where they're supposed to list the pros and cons. So I'm going, they are actually exercising that. So those are the items that you try to pick, and you take away those that are not so relevant, or that your program would not even be assessing or testing in a sense. So really choose according to that, and overall makes the essay much more concise, much more focused, and you're truly evaluating the elements that are actually in your program. So for this questionnaire, we also modified some of the items so that it better align with our qualitative questions. So which would then enrich and allow for better matching of the quantitative and qualitative data during the discussion. So what I mean by that is, an example is one of the original items in the ECQ was when someone seems upset, I'm usually uninterested and unaffected by their emotions. Okay, that's the original thing. In Little Dr. Low, we'll run through that the scale that they use for the decision making had broken it down to different components as well. And one of the components was morality. And so we tried to, with this item, try to incorporate that aspect of morality into it by keeping its same structure. So we changed it to, sorry.
This one, already.
Yeah, when others are sad, I'm motivated to try to help them. So here the content of the item still more or less remains the same. But the words we choose to use and frame it now overlaps with the language that you're using in your qualitative data collection. So because the structure of the item still remains the same, you can be relatively confident that it still measures the sub-dimension, and that you're still measures that sub-dimension. So really do be creative with this, because you can really make it so much easier to then triangulate your data when you're doing your analysis.
Could you show the original?
No, I didn't think we have any of the original. So the original sounded like when someone seems upset, I'm usually interested and unaffected by the emotions. I made it into when others are sad, I'm motivated to try to help them. So I mean that one was a negative, right? It was a reverse scoring, so it was not influenced to anything. So there's one thing that I felt that simplify it for the kids, remove all the negatives first. So this one basically saying when I see someone upset, I'm influenced to do something. I just kind of shifted the focus of it to specifically motivated to help them. Right? So it's the same content, just with the words that we're using in quantitative. Okay, so after doing all of that, in the end, we narrowed and scoped down the ECQ to a total of only 15 items and created two versions. One for students, which is their self-reports, and one for teachers, which will be their observer reports. So I'll give you a moment to take a look at how the questions are structured. So the previous slide will be so the items with the brackets are at the end are those we modified to match with the qualitative version. So this one, affect is one of the components of the social decision making scale. That's not. So here you can see for affective ability and affective drive. And here is for affective reactivity, cognitive ability, and cognitive. For a while.
The original was a lot longer yet then. And then you all have the originals as well. Yeah, I've given it to you.
Yeah, so the key tip and that thing I would say is as the arts and programs in the arts largely experiential. The purpose of the quantitative data is really to complement the rich qualitative data in everything. So unlike it, for example, psych, which is like this, right? Where many of these scales will actually come from, you'll find a lot of these scales from the site. But inside, they are very strict about, once it's been validated, use it exactly the same way as used to ensure that you don't affect any of the ability. But because when doing it for the arts, I would say that when creating surveys for an art project, you can really afford to, or you should actually be encouraged to be a bit more flexible. So I mean, of course, it's ideal to have the scale be exactly as it is as possible, but the scale needs to really accommodate and match the experience that your participants are presented with in the program. So that means removing entire sub-dimension or adding some items, to make sure that their experience is fully captured. By all means, do so if it allows you to then provide objectivity and a basis of arguments for what you're discussing in your qualitative. So a lot of this is just providing some credibility to these claims that you're making from what you're seeing from what you're seeing in your qualitative data collection. So do just keep in mind though that if you do borrow items from the scale, don't lump it together with the items that have already been validated with its own subdimension. Let's create another subdimension or area of investigation and just make sure that you have at least 3 items in each subdimension. Just for the sake of making sure you can really see whether there's any to probably measure it. Yeah. So next. Okay, yes. So before I get to the results, I have to add a quick disclaimer. So due to, as Dr. Loh mentioned, due to some restrictions during data collection, for example, we weren't allowed to collect the names of our participants, and so we therefore couldn't do pre and post evaluation. Our findings do not reflect changes in empathy over time. Instead, they capture students' self-perceived levels of empathy during the programs. Okay, so with that in mind, all 42 students completed our adapted ECQ at the end of the program. Items were rated as 6-point Likert scale, with agreement defined as scores 4 and above. So in addition to students' self-reports, teachers who observe the sessions will also need to complete the ECQ to provide their observations. So overall, most students felt that the program allowed them to engage with all 5 subdimensions of the ECQ. Average self-ratings range from about 4.5 to 4.8 out of 6, while teacher ratings were slightly higher at about 4.7 to 4.9. So now let me zoom into some of the key findings. So the highest agreement among students was seen in effective reactivity. So this is about the appropriate reaction, with about 81% reporting that the program gave them opportunities to practice appropriate emotional responses to others' experiences. So in other words, many of them felt that the program itself encouraged them to show concern and compassion, which were identified as the correct way of responding to the stresses that were experiencing from the characters. So overall, this component was rated highly by both students and teachers, suggesting a strong alignment between the students' self-perception and teachers' observations. So in other words, students were not only emotionally feeling appropriately, but also responding to others in meaningful ways through their actions during the program where the teachers could see it. Next, another key finding was the strong agreement for cognitive drive, which is the intent or motivation to I'm going to even consider what you're saying here. With about 79% of students reporting that the program motivated them to consider and adopt other people's perspective to better understand their thought processes and intentions. So while students gave a relatively high average rating of 4.83, teachers reported a slightly lower average of 4.44. So this suggests that although students may internally be reflecting on others' perspectives, this may not always be translating into observable actions. Okay, and in contrast, affective drive had the lowest agreement rate of 24%. Affective drive is the intent and motivation to consider someone else's solution. Had the lowest agreement of 24% and was also one of the lowest rated components of students. So this suggests that fewer students felt that the program actually encouraged them to actively engage with others on meaningful. So interestingly, teachers' ratings were slightly higher than the students. So this may suggest that while students do engage with others emotionally, it often happens more automatically rather than a deliberate or intentional effort. So the behavior of emotionally trying to connect is being seen and the students are doing it, but a lot of times students are not actively conscious that, I'm going to make an effort to try to be emotional. Yeah, so now we're ending time back to Dr. Loh to run through some of the qualitatives.
Any questions for him? The quantitative findings? Yes.
Actually, when some of the teachers are also the facilitators.
Well, these are the literal
Like form
teachers who are just watching the program.
Okay.
So normally in insights like that, right, or conclusions like that, actually we need to find out more lah. We'll say that it's a finding, but it's a limited finding that you have to investigate further. And then the findings just stops there. It cannot go any further or deeper. Okay. So now I'm going to go through the qualitative aspects, right, of empathy. So we know that for effective reactivity, which means that they felt emotions, they would. This happened throughout, all the activities, especially, the main activity, right? So this is an example of the quotation discussions that we pulled out from the audio tracks. What are some of the feelings that arise during the performance? This is pertaining to the Raja and Nadim. A bit of fear, a bit of unfairness, confusion, anger. So you find that they're already naming emotions here, right? And so this is then evidence for effective reactivity. Effective drive, so wanting to be sensitive to share another's experience. Now, this was particularly pronounced or more evident when they looked at Nadim. So Nadim was sitting or standing here, and they were all surrounding Nadim, and Nadim was pleading with everybody, please save me from the Raja. Please help me to escape. So because there was a Nadim sitting and talking to them directly, the effective drive was higher, wanting to help him, right? So they felt pitiful for Nadim because he was at the stake. Yeah, save Nadim. It's the idea that you had the power to save him, that I could save Nadim. They really wanted to try and save him. So this is quite different from the principle and English at 75%. I found that there were less quotations which reflected effective drive for the pre-activity with the school principal. And I think it is because, there was no failed students in front of them saying, I feel my English, I don't want to stay back 1 year. Can you please help me tell the principal? Whereas when it came to Nadim, Nadim was sitting there. So this is a tactic then of the theatre role play that enabled effective drive. Okay, so effective empathy, right, as I said, wasn't so obvious with the failed student. The injustice came in form of proposed change with possible consequences. Yeah, and as I also said, then the main activity. So I think that has to do with effective empathy and effective drive was higher in the case of Nadim's situation. Okay, how about cognitive empathy? Multiple perspectives. This was very strong across pre and main activity. In fact, the pre-activity is this is the Raja's one. But actually, the pre-activity also a lot of conditions, right, for cognitive empathy, meaning that they can see and propose different perspectives or different solutions, right? So here, Raja didn't have the right to straight away give Nadim the death sentence because he didn't have any proof. What did Nadim do to be sentenced to death? Your Majesty, you're just jealous. I think the advisors are jealous. Nadim just wanted to help. Nadim saved the villagers. Nadim just wanted to help. Right, just wanted to protect the village. So these are all different points of view that they are starting to present to the Raja to try to convince him. And this is then evidence for cognitive empathy. Pre-activity, telling the principal why raising the grade of the passing mark is a bad idea. We are here in school, but some of us are very far from 75%. And I feel we can change the mark maybe to 55. Then we add another 5%. See, good idea. So we go gradually improve. So trying to take two points of view now. Okay, principal, you want the grade to go up. We accept your point of view, but you compromise. Actually quite mature, right? For young people to propose this. Okay, then I feel he only cared about the school's reputation, didn't care about the students, can even talk about the principal's point of view. If some students really struggle to reach 50, and if now they have to reach 75, won't they struggle even more? See, cognitive empathy here. Right, and then the mental health will decrease and they'll be very stressed out. So clearly it's ignited this aspect of cognitive empathy. Okay, so in conclusion, right, between Jude's results and the quotations that I pulled out from the pre-activity and the main activity, we can say that yes, TIE did indeed generate empathetic responses. The main activity provided more context-specific triggers, right? With Nadim being there, for example. So it was embodied, it was face-to-face, and there was a direct appeal to the students to help him. So this then created an emotionally charged kind of situation where students, can respond to him and imagine possibilities for him. So TIE moved beyond emotional reaction, beyond just active reactivity, right, into areas of moral reasoning and pro-social decision making. And so you've got the students' cognitive affective attunement eventually translated to value-driven collective responses, which shifts it into my next research area, which was the social decision-making modes. Yeah, but this is then what TIE can do in terms of empathy. I think this is the last slide. Yes. Okay. Any questions for empathy? Yes. Yes.
Sure, but question about just now we were saying where the situation in the main activity is more dire and therefore maybe it evokes more empathic response. So would there be a value to say like, let's say if that could be main activity 1, and then the main activity 2 is somewhere closer to the pre-activity where it's not so dire, and then we see whether they are more empathetic after activity 1.
I asked and explanate for more funding for signal too. I did try that. Yeah. Actually, for this scenario, right? Okay, I don't know whether putting the more context specific triggering one first and comparing it to one that is not so context specific and more cognitive, right? I mean that is the research area to understand the difference between having a more direct embodied kind of face-to-face situation versus a more abstract situation, right? Should we raise the passing rate to 75? That could be a research question in itself. Then that arrangement of the curriculum of the program would fit that research question. Yeah.
Some question asked, why not stop at empathy? Why go on to social decision?
Yeah. Okay, can I tell you, it wasn't very well thought through. What I mean to you. Okay, so right, how did I piece this together? So okay, the long and short of the story is Alvin came to me like, oh, I'm going to do this program TIE with Paris and Julia. So I said, then he asked me if I wanted to do research. So I said, okay, I do research. Then I went to find out what is TIE. And from reading what is TIE about, I came up with 2 main things. Actually there were 3, but I dropped 1. Empathy, decision making, social decision making, critical thinking. But I dropped, I dropped critical thinking because I felt that that was in a way too cognitive. Social decision making modes, right? It's actually not like empathy. It's a mapping of how the students make decisions. It is not to see if they made empathetic decisions, but the empathy, right, was like my impact side of this study. The social decision-making modes is the mapping part of understanding how TIE enables decisions to take place and what kinds of decisions to take place. So that's eventually how I decided on the social decision modes and empathy as the impact outcome. Yeah.
So is there a difference between the primary, upper primary reaction and the lower side? Because age-wise, maturity, life expectations, not life expectations, life experience. I'm thinking life expectancy, but no. Experience, very different.
Yeah. So AAC also asked. Then I don't want to do extra work like really true. So I said that the sample size is too small. I really did. The sample size is too small, it's true. But I did notice from taking out from the listening to the audio, actually the lower primary were more mature with their suggestions. The lower secondary were fooling around. Later you see that they tried all the lower secondary. So I then asked who I spoke to, and the person said, oh, upper primary, they are the oldest in the school, so they are very responsible. Primary 6 and primary 6. Then lower secondary, they become the children in the school again.
Yes.
So they fool around. So they probably didn't take the program as seriously as upper primary, which I thought was very true. But again, I have to do more research now, right?
And was there a difference in how good? Because all schools in Singapore are good, right? But they are good and good schools.
Yeah, within the programs, so they are their own. Within differentiate this. The Judex one has a big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With regard to age, primary, I think there are many ways to get it. We have our own trial runs with adults. For the teenagers, 18 to 20 something, friends. I think sometimes when you're older, you see role playing as just role playing. So it's very hit. So I have an idea. People have given suggested that why don't we jailbreak? You refuse. Then our job as facilitator is no matter the consequences. You break, then the soldiers will come to you. Then you have to reconsider. So it's easy to give suggestions. So I think maybe again it's just like rejection. When they're older, maybe they don't take it as seriously or they see this it's just a game. And so they suggest. So our role is to make sure that it's not just a throwaway suggestion. We bring it back to the ground. Whereas for maybe, again, for the primary school, maybe they buy into just they're more emotionally connected in that sense. They tend to relieve the roles they play easier. So I could also maybe to that point. Yeah.
You may get there eventually, but the type of TIE and the quality of TIE, the quality of facilitation, you do discuss that at the you were talking about that a little bit. Like if it's a direct appeal, then there's more connection to a direct appeal, for example. So there are certain qualities of the cases that are presented that make it easier for them to access.
Yeah, so this is one thing we discovered. Yeah, the more embodied, like certain scenarios of the construct conditions of the TIE program. I think Adit had pieced that together quite well. Yeah, the authority figure was the other thing that was very important. Yeah, how firm is the authority figure? And when the authority figure should change or not.
I'm quite curious. The questionnaire was pasted to the students have self-report and then the teachers to observation. Did the active facilitator themselves also take of what they observed?
We didn't.
And any
Should we
reason?
have? Could have. But
Because I would imagine that the active facilitator are very embedded into the interactions, although they were the ones who sort of affecting certain decisions.
yeah, which is also part of the problem it's a bit of a gray area because when they're embedded and immersed and actually they can direct
Yeah.
the direction the discussion line. Then when they do the survey, it really will be biased. Yeah, so actually facilitator bias is a very important thing. Because you push the kids, right, to go and protest or not, sometimes it comes from you. It doesn't really come from them. That was the other thing now. Because
I don't think the actors facilitators even saw the questionnaire.
I don't think we can. Oh, it was just for the participants and
So it's just, in other words, the active facilitator is part of
part of the program.
part of the
Yeah, they're part of the analysis of the program.
I'm just thinking like on a post kind of thing. Does as the active facilitator data would have been also right?
We did that for the training guide. Yeah, because at the end, what I pulled out my mind got the last Excel and I see I pulled out all the facilitators questions was there was certain the morals when to push the student, when not to push the student. Yeah, they wanted to know, they wanted more guidance to figure that out. And then there was also the issue of the Raja, right? See, after all the fantastic suggestions from the students, right, Manjula School, or to the Raja and the principal didn't move. So after the pre-activity, all the suggestions, the principal didn't move. When they got to the new activity, they were a bit resigned. Yeah. And that we didn't foresee. I think didn't foresee. No matter what, it came out, in the text. No matter what I suggest, it's not going to work. So you also need to shape it such that it doesn't reach that point. Yeah. So there were these parts. And then also the energy level of the group, because that has to do with the energy level of the group by the time it reached the main activity. Yeah. So all this was handled in the curriculum, the writing of the curriculum guide. At the end, when the actor facilitators were interviewed and asked about what they needed more or what could be done better. Okay, let's take a short 10-minute break. Come at 8:10, right? So then we'll get into the social decision making notes, the next part. Okay, yeah, so there's snacks behind and things
Okay.
Oh, there's a chat question.
I think I knew about this. So I do have.
Oh, really early.
Yeah.
Yes, I'll let you know first. Okay, come next part two. And part two has a lot of quotation because it's entirely qualitative. So I explain you all like a number and a heart shape symbol. So when you see the number and the hearts, it's I need your help with me. And if there are I want the other part, and it is okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Decision more experience. So, this comes from a reading, right? Assessing how we describe psychometric development of the decision mode scale. The scale has 5 different traits. I selected actually 6 different traits. I selected 4. Okay, so again, our real paper is, and you've seen this a few times now. This is the 4 that I selected. So APEC, which is all about gut feeling, emotional reactions based on how they felt now, followed their heart. Calculation, costs and benefits, potential benefits against risk, analyze all options, decided what was best. Right? And so all this is calculation. Identity deals with acting in a way that is based on who they are, true to themselves, true to their values. And then moral, what was fair, what was right, what would do the most good, and what would do the greater good. Okay? Now, all these were condensed into these 4 main areas, which I then used to analyze all the audio recordings of the interaction. So the first one, APEC, gathered a spontaneous response in word or action. Calculation enabled students to consider the situation, think or discuss pros and cons, and then what would be best for themselves. Identity enabled students to affirm and declare their values for identity. And then the last one, decide what was fair, right, for the good of the collective. Now you look at all 4 of this, can you tell me which one contradicts the other?
Calculation and moral.
Yes, actually, right. Actually, when I saw this, I also thought calculation and morality. Yeah. Because if you consider pros and cons and what is good for yourself, it might go against the collective good. Interesting, right? So let's see what actually happened, yeah? Okay, I'm going to take you through 4 scenarios, right, which then activated these decision modes. Now, I found that while I was trying to analyze all the audio transcripts, it didn't come out so clearly, like everybody was impact, then everybody was calculation, and something like that. I found that there was a flow in the way decisions were made. Okay? And so I'm going to go through the first scenario in more detail, and then I'll go through the other 3 scenarios a bit faster. So in selecting the class monitor, there was some kind of effect first, right? Many of them said, I don't. Straight away. Okay, so gut feeling, they don't want to take the role. And then ask why you don't want facilitator, right? Actor facilitator. Class monitor is a role of authority. So they didn't want to identify with authority. So you got identity. And then the principal insists every class must have a monitor. So no choice, must make a decision. They started to talk about why they should or should not be a class monitor. And finally, they reach a consensus. What's the best way to select class monitor? Yeah. So in fact, this would be the example. Why me? Don't want lah. I have a lot of plate. Not me. It literally comes out in recording like that. Okay. Then they move on identity, right? Don't want me. So you ask them why you don't want. Then all the you open a can of worms. Right? So across all groups, the monitor is seen to go to the teacher. Then you see the quotation, there's always the teacher's pet. Because they snitched. Snitches get stitches. So they all go on. And it's very revealing, right? Because they feel that the role then, made the If maybe someone would report on other students and get these students in trouble, but not only that, they didn't really want to be identified with the school authorities and their peers and avoided becoming the class monitor as a result. So there was a rejection of this particular type of identity. Okay. And then, as I said, because it's non-negotiable, right? So they calculated in their minds, is this good for me or not? Am I suited for this role or not? So more calculative. I have a bad track record, not me. I already got 2 detentions. And then there's a student says, okay, I don't mind. I pick up 3 times. Okay, so this is a bit more revealing of who they thought they were, pros and cons, right? So again, when I was listing out for the pros and cons, right? There's this in part of the calculation, right? If somebody do something wrong, then you take the blame for it. So the calculation involves cons, right? This is the bad part, the negative part. And it's then very revealing because the discussion shows that there's a fear of taking on accountability for the group and then being unfairly judged, right? So this is the cons side of it. And also it shows that they might not be too trusting of the middle tier to support them in their decision or in their judgment of their peers, right? So when they were calculating the pros and cons, these 2 main factors made it very logical for them to not want to meet us. So this is the way then they decided for themselves. Okay, now eventually then what you get is that the whole thing moved into a moral mode, right? We vote. Right. So someone says yes, I'll be, someone says no, I don't want to be. Then they voted, right? And so then it was declared that they selected the class monitor this way because this was Paris. And so it moved. So this was the flow of how they made the decisions. Okay, got the picture, got the territory, because it gets more complicated. Ta-da! Yeah. Okay, so here, right, we get the situation, the scenario of changing the English passing grade to 75. So first there was anger at the principal, right? I've skipped the quotations. Yeah, lots of anger, not fair, etc., etc. And then there were all these A to G modes of calculation. A to E moved into moral, identity moral, that tried to make a stand for the collective. But G and F went into calculation that was more about the self, preserving itself. Okay, so this is the part where, the story, as I told you, is that students have to sign a consent form to agree that their grades would shift up 75%, and the class monitor was in charge of trying to get their friends to sign the form. Okay, this is where I need audience. No, this one, I need to Indian. Okay, am I right? Okay, so we have the first one, right? Calculating the change as beneficial for one and the collective. So this was thinking about the whole group and saying that, this change will benefit everybody because everybody will improve 75%. Right? And so the quotation is here, right? Class monitor, like teachers say, retaining is not a consequence. Some people need more time to learn better. The facilitator then responds, need more time to learn better, but that means we cannot finish secondary school in 4 or 5 years. Then if we need help, the teacher will do remedial, you stay back, or the teacher will help out. So this is a very non-aggressive kind of response. It's trying to say that you will get help, right? You will do better. And so this supports this kind of calculation towards the common good. Here got one heart. Who's the one heart? Gina. Okay, I explain first, then you don't cue. So I read. Yeah, okay. Student 1, student. Here. Evaluating for fairness of the policy change, discerning how the change will affect the students, so that's calculation. Discerning the best way to negotiate with authority and identifying appealing to a greater higher power. Okay, so we're dealing with B and C first here. Right? And so this then goes into identity and moral in terms of the group then getting everybody to agree that the change was unfair, creating a collective identity as students to negotiate and appeal to the higher authority. Okay, go Regina.
You mentioned that most of the people cannot reach 50 marks. So making it 75 will make it even harder. Even the people who try really, really hard to reach 50, but they don't.
And then once you reach it to 75, even if you put it if they put twice their efforts, they're still not going to reach 75. That's not fair.
Okay, thank you. So this is to do with B, evaluating the fairness of the policy change. C,
Encourage students. I don't think just raising the score. The scoring benchmark is going to be enough for us to aim for excellence, because this is not encouraging. It's just getting them to work harder. And actually we'll be discouraged because we have to work harder for pretty much no particular reason.
okay, very good expression. So this is how the change will adversely affect them. Okay, and then I was expressed verbatim by the students. Right, we move to the next calculation. Three hearts. Jerry. Okay. Wait, let me see D. All right, deciding the best way to negotiate with D. Okay, go.
Oh, I got an idea. The way we bargain this is that because I know why the principal is changing the rule, because it's worried about school reputation. So we'll make it a bargain so that every 2 years the benchmark gets increased like every other year. And we can consistently, when it's raised that tiny bit higher, we can consistently meet that standard as it goes on. So like 5% of the best score of the previous year. So for example, let's say the best score last year was only a bad pass. So like when it's 52, 53, maybe 5% will be 50 to 58.
That's so cute. Wait, I'm trying to listen to this on the audio chat. The dot, right? It's like, oh, what did you say? I'm trying to check. Any Chris was helping me with this. Yeah, so she's very familiar with this. But you get the idea, yeah? Okay. The best way to negotiate with authority. It's very cute, don't you think? Okay. Okay, the next one. 4 hearts. Well, Kevin. Okay. Wait. So we're looking at identifying and appealing to the higher power, which can overturn the decision of school principal. This one is interesting. Kevin.
I'm already on.
Oh, I read the procedure. Why was the first instinct, writing to the Prime Minister?
Because he's a much higher authority than the principal.
Okay, next one, you.
Ask for parents to come.
Yeah, parent-teacher meeting. So we asked our parents to flame the principal. Other students mobilize? Yeah! It's good, right? Anyway, you can see. How come we're not feeling sensitive? So you can see how, hang on. It goes into identity and moral, collective identity, and the moral good, right? I think for it. Okay, then the selfish answer lah. The self-preservation ones. Calculating possible actions of resistance and the negative consequences from it. Now, who is 5 hearts? Because okay, then you be the student. Okay, I be the facilitator. As a monitor, how did you feel? How was your experience?
Scared. Pen the paper.
But then you signed it. So why did you sign it first?
I was scared.
You were scared of what?
Scared of Mr. Lee.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, right. So negative consequences, then the paper preservation. Yeah, C. Okay. Okay. We got continued here.
Okay.
Yeah, wait. So this one is deciding to bribe with peers. Very cute. Okay.
Very cute.
How do you mean by you had the easiest job?
Basically, bribe these two, you just saw it.
You bribe. How do you bribe?
Say I give you $2.
Is that something you've done before?
Many times.
Okay. Then they asked the facilitator asked the students, we should continue to play. Okay. Oh, so why didn't you want to? But so why then did you then decide to sign?
Money.
What can you do with that $2?
Can buy food with that $2.
Okay, so adherence to the role of authority. So the class monitor was trying to lie his way into authority, right? And if and the one who then signed the form did so out of personal benefit for the $2. So this we continued into calculation, did not go through model. Okay, got it. Okay, the third scenario. Raise taxes on the villagers. Alright. We have effect, shock, disbelief, unreasonable. These different calculation modes. or mostly in tomorrow, except for deceiving the authorities, self-preservation here. So this is when the Raja wants to raise taxes, everybody has to buy more rice, fish, etc. Okay. First one. I got no hearts here, so I will look. Increasing taxes on the villagers. So rationalizing the need to pay more taxes as being good for all, trust in authority. Right? So the student says the only way we can survive is if someone managed to find the money we have together right now. But I don't think we have barely enough. The town council is so poor. Okay, but I have a town council. And this one when Chris transferred, she laughed. Tell the children help also. We need to catch more. We need to use more bait. So poor thing like they took the responsibility on themselves here. But they truly believe that this would help everybody. Right? So it actually is still more. Okay, 6 hearts. That's good. Okay, so we're looking at negotiating for fairness by asking Raja to reciprocate. So here, asking Raja to sacrifice for the village, right? Come, student one.
You could sacrifice your own things, like your own rights. Your Majesty, why are we the ones who have to pay the taxes? Work extra hours when we are the ones protecting ourselves? As a Raja, as a person who's building and protecting the people in this village, why are we having to do most of the work and the ones?
It's critical thinking.
Yeah, 11, 12, 13.
Prodigy.
I got it. Okay. Thank you. Okay. All right. Then we've got 7 hearts. 7 hearts.
I have 7 hearts.
Okay. So we're looking at C right here. Fighting the root cause of the problem and save everybody from the taxes.
I have an idea. Instead of doing this, we should come up with a plan to stop the swordfish attack.
We save our village from the swordfish by stopping the swordfish. We need to find out why the swordfish are attacking us first.
We must fight the fish. No fish, then all our problems are gone.
All right, root cause. And then we've got D here. So we continue, deceiving the authorities to keep more for oneself. Oh, this one is cute. So I asked them, how many you have?
1.
You better not be lying.
I have already survived a year with only 1 bag.
Nice. So this one, she's supposed to be more than 1 lah. She's lying. This one is lying.
Very best.
Yeah, specifically. So different from the first one, right? Where they say, come let's try and collectively pull more without the poor town council. Okay? Okay.
They really got that.
They believe the chief minister. Okay, this is the simplest chart I have. Nadim's arrest and execution. So everybody was dismayed, right? All upset that the Raja is unfair. So it starts off with moral or after the effect. They wanted to speak out on behalf of Nadim, asserts that the chief minister advised are wrong. And in trying to defend their moral position, they came up with pros and cons for the Raja's decision. Right? So I'll go into this detail. Okay. It's talking a bit. Oh, sorry. I think we make it.
You can just press the first thing.
Yeah, there is. Okay, so 8 hearts. 7. Yeah.
But Nadim came to you with this idea. Instead of doing it himself, he came to you. He's allowing you to have the glory, and he's going to do the right thing. Sparing you, Majesty. Nadim is an innocent subject. He wishes no harm on you.
Okay, so speaks up on behalf of Nadim, right? And shows that the fears are unfounded in a way. Okay, then we've got 9 hearts. Okay. You will be student 1 and 2, IB 3 and 4.
Okay,
Okay.
by sacrificing, I mean by executing him, you're going to be showing that your fear of him. And by doing that, aren't you making him more powerful?
Good strategy. If let's just say that the advisor says that in a few years, Nadim might have thought of becoming Raja, Why not just wait a few years to see if there's a change?
What if another fish attacks and none of us have any idea to solve it?
Nadim might be the only one to make up a solution. The last swordfish attack has taken too much from us already. Convincing?
Yeah, quite good.
Yeah. So after all this, I think the Raja just ignore that.
Probably the right.
So I saw this now. I saw this. Yeah, because I thought they were coming up with very good ideas and solutions. Let's say. Okay, and then we're back to something a bit more complicated. So after the whole wayang, right? Then the students zipped out of their room, literally shook it out, and then had a discussion about the situation, right? Which eventually became a kind of tableau. So I also then analyzed this part. And what you have here is this first set, right? So fear and resignation. Okay. They calculated all the possible actions of resistance, negative consequences. In the end, they decided to be passive and not risk anything. Then you've got the empathy and anger, right? And then they wanted, to think of possible resistance with positive, etc. All these calculations, which led into identity and moral, except for the last one with calculation. This one had multiple perspectives. I'll show you. Okay, 10 hearts. Paul can do both students, Okay, wait, I explain a bit. So this one is looking at possible actions of resistance and negative consequences resulting in wanting to be passive calculation. Okay, same one.
I felt like I didn't want to go up because I was scared. Like, in front of all the other audience, scared to say something wrong. Even though we tried really hard to reason with the Raja, in the end, it still didn't work. Because in the end, the Raja still feels threatened by Nadim, and as long as he exists, he is a threat to the Raja. So I don't think there is much.
Sorry. Okay, more hopeful here. 11 hearts.
Here.
Okay, Rita, explain first. So we've got A, calculating possible actions of resistance and their positive consequences. So unjust judgment, finding ways to advocate for me. Okay, go.
Personally, I felt like if more villagers managed to stand up, we would have had a different outcome. Because if all the villagers opposed the Raja at one point, then the Raja wouldn't really have any more power. Because you're technically overthrowing his throne, and without people to rule, he doesn't really have much power at all. So if more people stood up and voiced their opinions, he doesn't really have much choice but to listen to the villagers to keep his position. We can do a protest. Think about it. The entire village against the Raja. The odds are mostly 3-1.
I'll start also need to rest. Before he or she gets any older. Okay. All right. Next one, negotiate objectively, right, with the Raja. Okay, so now I read. So, okay, what was the word for your strategy? We should have prepared more before we talk to the Raja. Be more reassuring. Plead. We need the Raja to gain our trust. Cannot be biased. So this one took a more, the gentleman politics that Singapore likes. Okay, and then 12 hearts. Oh, okay, go. Okay, wait, I explain this. Right, so we have possible alternatives that would save Nadim, right? And so this went into moral. This would then have maintained the peace between Nadim and the Raja. That's what I asked myself. What could have been done differently to save the boy?
Nadim shouldn't have told this idea, even though it saved a lot of people. He should have given the idea anonymously. He could have just done it. He could have put it in a letter and sent it to the Raja. Then the Raja could solve it without knowing who saved the people.
What do you think of this?
Very good idea.
Very good idea. But don't you think Nadim is a little bit sad? Mostly also fair, right? But yeah, I would have saved his life. You give let the Raja think that he came up with the solution in this case. Yeah. Okay, and so then the last one was a tableau of multiple perspectives, so there was no real conclusion there. Okay, so back to our research question. How does TIES, a theatre process, enable students to engage in social interaction and social decision making? So what happened over all the four scenarios is that you saw this process. All of them responded with affect and emotion, right, to the situation of injustice. They usually then came up with pros and cons calculation, right? And then most of the weighing of pros and cons took consideration the collective and what would be good for them as students or as villagers in their role, and eventually some kind of moral stance. So the TIE process actually enabled this form of decision making. Okay. Now, technically speaking, right, in terms of the actual TIE itself, what really made it make all this work? So this is Ivy's part. Ivy has class teach at express, but she wrote this part of Ivy. My brain was busted. I finished all the So the first thing is, and she's not a data person, but she's bringing out all these terms, brilliant terms. Dramatic tension created shared problems requiring communicative coordination. Very good, huh? Very powerful. Embodied authority generated consequential states that stimulated collective deliberation. So you needed the embodied authority. Public reporting required justification of group decisions, reinforcing accountability. So, this is a lot missing in our social media, right? Situation made them be comfortable for what they said. Small group facilitation produced multimodal reasoning within a supportive structure, your active facilitators. Fiction reality interplay deepened ethical reflection and grounded decisions in lived experience. So, although it was fictional, there was also a reality that was overlapped, and this then created actually very real critical reflection. And the whole experience was immersive. Okay. So in conclusion, right, TIE functions as a multi-layered participatory system that integrates social interaction, collective reasoning, and empathic engagement. So in the need for interaction, right, what actually happened? Group deliberation deepened cognitive and affective engagement. The shared fictional world was safe, but it was consequential enough for the students to be able to discuss so that ethical reasoning could unfold. This kind of process very difficult to have in all the school subjects, but enabled in TIE, right? So it is effective because there's coherent theatrical design that binds narrative, embodiment, and dialogue into a unified pedagogical way. And this is why it works. So very powerful, right? So you see, I didn't go through this journey. I put it at the end. So all these findings support this. Remember, I always say that the theories support the quantified research, right? So actually, you said that. Okay. So what are the theories or concepts that support these findings? The UN, actually, that's the first one, right? By context, has something to do with children's right workspace decision making. There's a reading about adolescent decision making, negotiating uncertainty, social consequences, etc. And of course, the MOE for behaviors and competencies about social awareness, social responsible decision making, and concerns. Concern actually goes into political essence, which clearly TIE does. And then of course, you got empathy, which is relationship and achievement. Yeah. So this also then actually was a start in the peer review along with women's questionnaire and social works. Okay, so that's it. That's it for my presentation.
I would like just to put in context the decision by the Raja, because this is an activity in role. So there's also, when a suggestion is made by a student or a villager, the consideration for the Raja involved is it's not just words, but now you're reading and you all read so well, so nice. But when the child comes up, there's tone, there's attitude. There are also the people around. So that as the Raja, so as the facilitator, is quite scary when they're there. You have to make a decision because not this program, in the previous program 30 years ago, the Raja made a decision, and it affected the students. And some of them cried at the end because they didn't manage to save Raja, even though they know it's role playing. Because it really affected. This time around, yeah, it can go that way as well, I realize. So at the end of every run, we do have kind of evaluation because as a teacher in role, sometimes you have your own blind spots. So, and again, it's like improvisation, it's not right or wrong. It's just the decision you make at that point. So when you evaluate, then we question that why we make that decision. When from the outside it looks so obvious that just go with them now. But I feel sometimes then it's streets. Because a child or a villager can bring up something and, hey, why don't you just do this? But then what is this when you point at the Raja? So there are consequences. So I think that unpacking at the end of it is very important, whether you fail or you succeed in rescuing the Nadine. I think how the facilitator unpacked it. And there's a final part, which is a tableau part, because it's already 3 hours. So the fun, and we also don't want to go into too much of unpacking and theory and all that. So it was using theatre again, by using tableaus about looking back at what decisions we've made, what can you do, or what are your reflections. So it's done through a tableau, statues, and then some of them like, oh, then we have changed our tone, and then more reverence, or you're right. So they're all that. Again, I feel a program like that shouldn't just end with 3 hour program. It goes back. There's the teacher's pack. Because to make it even more effective, you have to continue. The teachers and the parents or whoever are all the stakeholders in the child development, they have a role. So I feel I think a lot of the times when we do theatre projects, community and all that, they always more than enough it stops. And then we evaluate, but then we realize it's like aborted, you see. It doesn't go into full term where the parents and the teachers, the society is involved. How? I don't know, but I feel that's a conversation we all need to. Thank you. You want to explain a bit more about your curriculum?
Hello, everyone. Well, so I asked Isha what I need to question, I think. Oh, I didn't prepare anything. So basically, I think a lot of things are very resonant with the sharings that Isha has shared, as well as the reflections that you guys have seen context to, as well as your questions as well. I think just to add on to what Julius was sharing about the response of the Raja, the facilitation needs to, I feel, be guided in a way where, yes, it's not easy to agree because of all these things. But then I think in terms of allowing for that space is, okay, so what are certain markers that might push us to certain decisions? And that is something that needs to come with the training of the facilitators together. So while everyone has a certain disposition or certain bias or certain style of facilitating, there must be certain elements where, okay, when they say something like this, and there's a potential for it to be moved, how then do we collectively as a facilitator in role give them that opportunity to continue? So for example, they say, oh, this is not fair. How do we in role facilitate them? So what is fair then? What does fairness do to you? Because as in role, we'll be like, no, this is my decision. So it's a lot of articulating the thought processes that we would have at the end of the engagement, but in role. So you're then balancing that actor and character and objective of the character with what the facilitator can do to kind of bring to help the children kind of make that connection. If not, then there'll be that brick wall and they'll be like, okay, we cannot continue. And I think at the core of it, then it is quite contradictory for an actor to be an actor facilitator, because as an actor, you are beholden to your character, and that is what my character wants, right? I have to make sure that I achieve what my character wants. But what my character wants may mean that I have 42 children crying at the end of it because I'm not right? But what if they are giving, of course, if they are not giving a nuanced kind of argument against that, then maybe that is the situation that needs to be led to. So how do we then train these actor facilitators to stay in character, but at the same time allow that level of nuance to understand what these children who are playing the character as well, but of course they are not as in role as we would be, right? What are they actually trying to articulate? And the challenges come in sometimes, like we have mentioned, they don't take it seriously. But again, there's also an opportunity to highlight that, oh, when you don't take it seriously, these are the consequences of it. And in a way, for example, like, oh, we don't need to vote because if you vote, nothing happens, right? Okay, then nothing happens, the status quo.
and there are consequences, and there are characters that have to go through those consequences. So at the core of it, I think from observing the engagement and also hearing back on the responses, it is a matter of how do we find a structure within something, but at the same time allow for that fluidity of thought, fluidity of trying to understand and discern what the children or the students are trying to articulate. And the curriculum guide focuses a lot on structures that can actually help to identify that, oh, this is what is said, but what is meant there could be many different ways. And how do we then respond in varying degrees to allow that conversation to continue? Yeah. I think at this point, if you have any questions, I would be open to answering about it because I have nothing else to say.
The curriculum guide is used by Ms. Bobo.
For ultimately it's for facilitators, for the active facilitators themselves to be able to. So I individually an active facilitator, but also collectively for a group of active facilitators. So in this case, right, maybe one of the things that it suggests would be, so let's say you have 6 groups, and then every facilitator has their own degree of like, okay, I'm more pro protest, for example, or I'm more passive, right? And then you have individual groups that have their own dynamics, right? There should be an opportunity for the facilitators to also come together and like, okay, you know what, these are the dynamics. And we have decided that the 3 of us are a bit more passive, the 2 of us are a bit more active. But does it fit our group dynamics? And if it doesn't, do we want to alter it, or do we want to allow that to be seen as the natural order of different suggestions that they might come up with? So things like this. Yeah.
I have suggested that the guide, because PIE is very difficult to it requires so much logistic and not it, and then you've got to have all the blocks and all that. So my suggestion was also that the guide can be used for group work facilitation actually in a more school context type of yeah, but can you figure that out then? So that when you have training. Yeah. So look out for Adit and training. So he's got a guide. The way that I think he wants to present it.
Not sure whether it was answered in, or like whether there was consideration if PIE was used to facilitate change in the individuals, maybe students or adults. In an ideal, how would you measure, or what would be an ideal design to sort of kind of check whether TIE can promote that change upon the experience?
So in that case, right, it will become more prescriptive immediately, right? In terms of empathy, we will need to put the pre and post. And then we have a scenario that really does make sure that it engages with the affected side, right? So the face-to-face type situation, context-based. The social decision modes then would have to be decided. And for example, that's why it's prescriptive. There needs to be a shift to the model, a change from personal pros and cons, and the tracking of the shift, or even the effect, right? And the shifting of it. How is the model like? Is it taking a stand to shift on that? So that there is an endpoint that you want to see change.
Yeah. And I think also we mentioned that there will be a lot more of the articulation of the calculations, because a lot of studies show that what causes change is when the person who needs to change are able to say out the reasons themselves. So they cannot have the facilitator say, you should do this because it's better, you should do this, but the facilitator will need to approach in a way where they will come up with the responses, come up with the reasons, and they need to articulate it out. So I think there'll be a lot more of that reflection in a sense to kind of drive the change.
And I think in the curriculum guide also, I think there's this explicit nature of for an actor in role, right? Sometimes the role of the facilitator might also be a very objective driven for them,
right? Because, oh yeah, this is part of my role. I need to make sure that it goes to a certain objective. So it's also an unlearning of sorts for an actor to allow the conversation and to identify things that sometimes a lack of response is still a response, or a negative response is not something that we need to correct, right? Because that is the reality of that interaction based on the situation, based on the questioning, and also based on the dynamics of the group.
Another question.
Got another question. So it's action research, right? So it's supposed to guide.
Wasn't in the end.
That's what I was wondering. Like how has it changed the practice of theatre and education for the group that the theatre group?
Because we couldn't conduct second other people together. Yeah, so basically from whatever I got, right, and then the facilitators and their reflections, then we kind of structured the guide, wrote the guide, but there were certain situations that I didn't have sent out to Julius Paris, the authority situation and other situations, to get them to respond back. So then that was the way that guide was revised. Look up on these areas and to kind of utilize it to strengthen it. But we couldn't test.
Because also like what Dr. Low mentioned before, that because we couldn't collect the data from the students, like actually the initial data collection plan was to do the change in scores between either versus session 2 and see what the changes are causing to the overall. And then that would shape and better guide the direction for creating a guide.
So a way of that being transposed into this curriculum was reflecting on the original team, Julius, Harris, and Alvin's own experiences when they were running it as facilitators, and the challenges of articulating that to the group of facilitators. What stuck, what was lost in the translation, and then identifying also how then do we articulate that so that the group of facilitators training for DIE will be able to identify the different traits that they need to focus on when they're facilitating.
Maybe I add a bit of context because when it was first done 30 years ago, we just came together, we are young actors, no training, just know that we want to do this, and then there was a structure. Alvin came with the structure that we took from the workshop and had teamwork, works. And then we said, okay, we just went in and we're daring like we don't know, right? We're not hard. So we did it, and then we experienced. So a lot of it was just instinctive. Right? So we did it. We had a long session. After every 3 hours of a session, we will have another 3 hours of drinking coffee and talking, right? And we learned from that. So this time round, 30 years later, when it was commissioned, we have to start to think, what did we do? How did we train new that? And that is when you put things in context and we meet with all the research. And suddenly you have to shift here and you have to think here, more from here. So I think that's where we need to balance. Now we are looking for that balance. Then unfortunately we only did the pilot. I mean, fortunately, I'm so glad that we here, at least we have not been written. And that serves as something we will continue to explore. There's a base, right? Then we just need to try it out with the young people. So yeah, that's where yeah. And another thing about your question, right? It's about it's like it's experiential. So you can't really say, oh, that maybe 10 years down the line, because they experience something, they might not get it. Hopefully, like any education, or it triggers something. I see, I know what it means, right? So I think that's a whole gap. Of course, most immediate private, some people are there. Some you never know. And I think it's with that kind of whole vacuum that I can continue. I see results all the time. With the kids nowadays, sometimes a lot of them they get disheartened. But you have to trust that there is something.
Okay, so we stopped here last night, probably.
I feel like it's like the story of how we become trained politically.
Yeah, actually it is
so big.
Yeah. It's no word for this way people.
Yeah.
So should like so we should get stop the recording. Okay, I think everybody is gone, right? Oh, there's three more. Oh, hi Shirley, and I don't know the next. I can't read your name. Any questions? Those on Zoom? We can just unmute and I can hear you if you have any questions.
Yeah.
That okay? Okay, I'll end the recording here and I'll end the Zoom meeting. Thank you very much for being here and listening on the audio.